do some introductions now. So this is about your portfolio. This is about how do you what you need to put in there. And my name's Ian Palmer. I'm the principal of Escape Studios. I'll say a little bit more about myself in a minute. And I have my illustrious colleague here, Mark, who's head of animation. He'll be talking a bit more about his background. We also have in the background there Lucy and Ellie, who are going to be looking at the questions and hopefully helping us out, make sure we don't miss anything as we're going along. So just a little bit about me. As I say, I'm the principal of Escape Studios, so I lead in all the academic stuff. I've got a bit of a weird background, which I think many of us have, and I think Mark will probably say the same. I started off in a drawing office in an electronics company, started working on radar systems as an electronic design engineer, then did digital systems and kind of got bitten by the academic bug. I then ended up working on an animation system called Realism and actually got a doctorate for the work that I did developing that. I then worked with animation and virtual reality projects, kind of developing that further into kind of collaborative performance systems, etc. And then ended up teaching computer graphics and programming. And then, because I still had links kind of between industry and academia, ended up designing degree programs that had really strong industry content in. And that's when I got involved with Escape Studios, because that's very much at the heart of what we do. So I've been here about 10 years now. And I helped develop the original degree programs and now kind of head up all the academic side. Mark, do you want to say a bit about your background, which I think we have a slide?
Well, my background's all over the place. So I studied psychology originally because there wasn't in the mid 80s. There wasn't such a thing as animation degrees, and then I ended up in some odd jobs because I didn't want to be a kind of occupational psychologist. I did a TEFL course, which is teaching English as a foreign language abroad, because I wanted to live abroad. And then I ended up living and teaching in Barcelona for a bit. And then I ended up in a publishing house writing English language textbooks in Brazil. And I got laid off from that. The company downsized, and walking on the beach, I met a guy who as actually now does football journalism for the BBC, and he said that they needed people to write pitches for wildlife documentaries. So I thought, I can do that. I've just worked in a publishing house. So I did that for a bit. And then, of course, I came back to Britain. Didn't know what I wanted to do, but a job came up as a researcher in a British television company. And I got into that. And because I've been mucking around with Flash in my bedroom, they saw I could do it, and they asked me if I wanted to do stings. So I got put in the graphics department as a Flash animator. And then I got made redundant from that company. There's a kind of trend here. And I realized I actually wanted to study animation, actually really learn how to do it. So I did a short animation course, and that got me a job as an animator for visual effects companies. So I was doing that for about 10 years. And then Gordon Brown, who was the then Prime Minister, took away the tax breaks for a couple of years on that sector, and that made the work a bit scarce. So I ended up retraining again because I was getting kind of old at that point as a physics teacher. And then I worked for about 5 years as a physics teacher in high school, and teaching in high school is pretty tough. So I was very grateful when Alex said, hey, who's my boss, slightly below Ian, and said, why don't you come and work at Escape and teach animation? So that's how I landed up at Escape.
So there you go. We will have these weird meandering careers that get us there. And that's the way things, don't think any of us set out in a plan to do that. It's very good that you, however, are setting out with a plan and a clear goal of what you want to do. And it's our job to try and help you get there, so you don't have quite such a weird career path as us. So what we're going to be talking about today is about preparing your portfolio to apply for us. The portfolio is a really important part of your application process, because although we're interested in the qualifications you have, what we're more interested in what you can actually do. So when you are invited to submit that portfolio, and you will get an invitation from us after you apply, you need to supply us a URL that gives us a link so we can access it. And that can be, there are many ways of doing this. It could be a Google Drive that is full of files and so on that you've created. It could be Dropbox. It could be ArtStation. You might create your own website. If it's a show reel, you might store that on YouTube or Vimeo. So there's various ways of you doing that. Basically, what you need to do is think of a way that's going to present your work in the best way so we can easily access it. And it's very important that works, and there's no kind of sign-in process or passwords that we need to put on there, because that would obviously make it very difficult for us to apply and would delay the process. So that's the first thing you have to think of. You'll get an invitation from us. Please send us a URL that allows us to access the work that you're putting together to present as your portfolio. So, of course, the next thing is what goes into that. So a really basic question is, how many pieces should I include? And there's no real answer to this, I'm afraid. There has to be a balance between merely showing sort of one or two pieces, which really wouldn't give us a flavour of what your skills are. Of course, ranging to giving us 100 different pieces, which we would have to try and sift through and work out what it was you want to present. And I think this is where you should be starting to edit your own work effectively. And when I mean edit, I don't mean like a video edit or an audio edit. I mean, in terms of selecting what you think the best pieces are, being really kind of sometimes a bit brutal. There might be a piece of work you've done that you really like, but actually doesn't show off your skills so well. So it also depends on the complexity of each piece. If you've got some very simple pieces, you might want to include more of those. If you're an artist who works in something like Unreal Engine or Maya and you create something really complex, then maybe it's just some renders or stills of those images. So it's really about showing off what you can do to the best of your ability, but not overloading us just with including everything you've ever done. So I know that doesn't give a complete answer, but if you just think about what is going to show these people the best of my skills, the best of the work that I've done, but I'm not going to include everything that I've done ever since I was 14 years old. So that might give you some idea of the amount of stuff. And I know it's not really a clear answer. There are some things that we say, do not avoid. And I've kind of touched on some of those already. Don't include too much work. Sometimes we'll have a Google Drive included where someone has just basically kind of dumped everything they've ever done since they started either, picking up a mouse or a keyboard or a pencil or whatever it is. And that's not really very helpful to us, because if you can imagine, it's difficult for us to understand what your kind of quality standards are. If you think all this stuff is great, are you really that kind of person that's going to be selective enough, that's going to be able to spot what's good and what's bad and so on in your own work as well as others? So that's really important. I mentioned about the password protected link. Please don't do that. Please make it as easy for us to do. If we have to contact you again, it's going to delay the process. So please don't do that. It just makes things more difficult, and think about how you can best do that. Another one is about not putting your best work first. So if you can imagine, let's say it's a video you put together with the pieces of work you have, or some people create a presentation in Google Slides or PowerPoint, which is great. But what you really want to do is put that really good stuff up front. So immediately we start looking at your work, we think, wow, look at this is great. Rather than putting some stuff that you're not quite so proud of and thinking, I'll save the best part to last, because first impressions are really important. It's kind of the way it works. If you think when you start reading a book or watching a film or playing a game, you kind of make your mind up in about the first 30 seconds to 5 minutes. And sometimes you might turn off that film or stop playing that game or not read the rest of that book because you haven't been engaged, you haven't really been captured. So make sure you put that best stuff up front. And also think about how you present it. Now, it is fine just to have a set of files in a Google Drive, but just think about, even within that, how those individual pieces are. Maybe you've done some painting or some sketches that you've captured an image of, and it's fine to do that, but sometimes the images aren't very good. They're in dim lighting. You can't really see what they are. And again, it just makes us think you don't really take a lot of pride. You're not proud of what you're showing us. So just think about how you actually present that and how it can be given to us in a way that can really make sure we see the best of it and make sure we kind of get a real impression of what you're capable of, rather than perhaps something we might still have some questions over. So now we're going to talk a bit more about content, and I'm going to hand over to Mark, who's going to talk in the next slide about the art portfolios, and I'll be talking more about the BSc technical ones later. So over to you, Mark.
Yeah, so in terms of the arts portfolios, I mean, of course, Just depends on what sort of area that you're wanting to specialize in. If you're interested in 3D animation, well, we want to see now that you have Blender on the market, which is a 3D application, we'd like to see some 3D work, ideally. Some 3D animation, it can be very basic, but at least it shows that, you've attempted to use the software that's available. Of course, any life drawings are always important in animation. I would say 2D and 3D, because it shows that you've been able to look at form and analyze it and translate it to the page. I mean, obviously, this is very important in the case of 2D animation, which is all about drawing skills. So, I mean, it's paramount that anyone who's trying to do a 2D animation course needs to be able to draw well. It becomes very, very difficult if you can't draw. Obviously, we can help people in their drawing skills, and we'll try and get you to practice on things, but it's important to show that you can draw if you want to come and do a 2D animation course. I mean, there are various areas. I mean, if you're going into something like if you're going into visual effects and you're interested in modeling, then obviously we'd be interested to see if, have you modeled things before? Do you have some modeling work? And again, in my own, I think drawing is also important in these areas as well, just to show that that you're somebody that can take an idea, an imaginative idea, you can draw it, and you can use a 3D application, even if it's at quite a basic level, and translate your ideas using that application. Obviously, any arts portfolio, we're essentially, the bottom line is we're looking for creativity. So anything that you can show us, even if perhaps sometimes it's not directly related to the thing that you're applying to do with us, if it shows that you have creativity, an artistic eye, then it's going to count in your favor. I mean, I think if I was looking at an animation portfolio and I saw that the person had submitted some absolutely amazing photographs, it might give me pause and think, wow, this person obviously has an eye for detail, has an eye for composition, is able to, to see what is important in the frame of a shot. And these are all things that you can bring to bear if you're making a short film or you're animating. So these are just some things um, in terms of the arts portfolios that we'd be looking at. I mean, you don't need to have everything. It depends on the particular discipline that you're applying for. But obviously, if you're applying for something like concept design, then having 3D animation work is not really important to you. And it's much more important to have maybe some drawings and, perhaps maybe some 3D work as well. So it kind of depends on the particular course that you're trying to get into, which of these things in this list are going to be more important to you. But obviously, what we're primarily concerned with is your level. Are you creative? Can you take an idea? Can you develop it? Because we can teach you the software. Oh, yeah. That I mean, okay. These are some examples of things that have been taken out of our arts portfolios. This one here is an undergraduate portfolio where you can see that they've taken some statues, and you've got sketches of them, which show that they're able to one, it shows kind of drawing ability, and they're able to analyze form, and yeah, they've obviously studied the way that I think one of them is Michelangelo's David, and I think these other ones are um, neo. I think they're neoclassical statues. But again, it's looking at form, looking at the way that light and shade, um, are thrown on these images, and they're trying to. Well, obviously they've studied them. They're writing about them. They're also writing about the period, and they're also able to try and translate some of those physical 3D forms into drawings, which we can see them over here as well. And you have on the right hand side a photograph of a butterfly. I mean, I think it's a photograph of a butterfly. No, actually, I think it's a. Is that a photograph? I actually can't tell. Well, it's either a photo, a nice photograph of a butterfly, or perhaps it's a rendered image that somebody's done of where they've created something. But the bottom line with all of these things is what we're actually trying to get is we want to see what is your artistic eye, what are you capable of producing, and how can you use, whether it's pen or paper, the tools to kind of give us something that shows, you know, creativity. So I think at the end of the day, in terms of all the portfolios that I've looked at, the single most important thing is, do I see potential and creativity in that student, and can that be harnessed, whether or not, you know, that person perhaps is. I mean, to give you an example, you know, I'm saying that if I was to try and accept somebody for a 3D animation course, obviously I'd like to see some animation. However, if that person was to come and show me some absolutely beautiful pencil drawings, and some uh, oil, a couple of oil paintings of portraits that they'd done, and you know, that in itself, I would give me pause to think, well, you know, maybe, you know, this person obviously has a lot of creativity, even though they don't have some of the specific things I might look for. So in someone who's wanting to do 3D animation. So I think it's try and give us something that relates to the discipline you want to study. But the most important thing, the thing above all of this, is, you know, try and show some creativity in the stuff that you present to us. Does that? Okay, and here are some examples from some of the for the master's course. The first, I think, is an animation, which this person's done.
Okay, see, you guys? What if we don't get magic beans? I mean, what if all we've got are beans?
Okay, so short animation is what's known in the trade as a lip sync piece. So the person is doing a funny piece of dialogue, and on the right hand side we see a model with what is known as grooming. So somebody's modeled this kind of creature, and they've put a kind of feather groom on the side of it. So these are two examples of people that are going for a master's level. So obviously the level is higher, but they're both trying to show intent on the kind of things that they're interested in by these two very good showreel pieces. I mean, the first one is the animation, so that's obviously someone that's interested in animation. They're, you know, they've obviously tried to show that they can understand a little bit about posing and lip syncing for a humorous piece of dialogue. And the second one is someone who I'm assuming is interested in doing a master's in creature creation and is showing their creation of a creature with what's known as a groom, which is the kind of the hair that the creature has on it, which is, yeah, it's quite impressive. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm just going to pick up some questions in the chat, which I think probably people may have read the answers to. Someone asked, you know, what if I don't have access to kind of, you know, digital equipment to be able to do some of this stuff, either at college or at home? We are still very interested in traditional art portfolios, and that's one of the things Mark said. You know, if, for example, if you're applying for 3D animation, it's nice if you have tried that, because there are free packages that allow you to do that. But in terms of us spotting potential, if we see a really good traditional art portfolio, we would still find that, you know, really encouraging, and think it probably leads to the skills you need. And somebody asked also about drawing from imagination or drawing from still life. And I said, you know, both are really good. Still life shows your observational skills and has much more about you can interpret something that you're seeing in front of you and converting that into an image. So they're both important, but I think the still life type stuff is really quite useful to try. And again, you can do that at home with a piece of paper and a pencil and you know, just some stuff on the table. Anyway, moving on to the technical one. So this is if you're applying for a BSc or an MSc type program. This is slightly different. So people perhaps struggle sometimes a bit more with that, because I think an art portfolio people are more familiar with. When it comes to a technical portfolio, what kind of thing are we looking for? And again, there could be 3D work in this. So it might be that you've created some models, or maybe you've done some stuff with some kind of procedural scripting in Houdini or something, some other package. You might have had something like that, but that is still very valuable. What we're looking more than just the way it looks would be more the way you've kind of technically constructed that. Do you have an understanding of the way that thing has been put together and some of the technical challenges of that? You may have made either some kind of prototype or a playable game level. A lot of games have editors that you can kind of construct stuff in. For example, Unreal Engine, which I know somebody mentioned they haven't got access to that, but it's freely available. You need a fairly good PC to be able to run that. So that could be a challenge, but there are other things. There are Game Maker piece of software that you can do, and you might want to construct that, for example, if you're going to look at games design or something like that. Examples of scripting or coding that you might have done at school or college. Most people now, from my experience in most schools, colleges, learned sort of basic scripting around Python. Maybe you've done some kind of little game where, you know, you've got to, you know, guess a number, or you've got to, you know, click on some things that do some of those things. What's important with things like that is you also put in a little explanation of what you've done and how it works, because it's quite easy to kind of grab examples of that from somewhere and just kind of copy them. What we really need to see there is that you've had some input into that, and you've made it your own, and you've kind of done some stuff to that. Someone's just asked about if I have a playable game, is there a way to include it? It's great if you can capture images and a video of it, because sometimes the challenge with an executable is it may not run on what we're trying to view it on. So always be aware of that. It comes back to the thing about the format and not having a password protected thing. If it's difficult for us to view it, we're going to have to get in touch with you and say, can you do it? So think about if there's a way of you capturing that. I mean, the worst case, worst comes to worst, you could run it on whatever you're running and just film it on your phone, and then kind of upload that and say, right, here's my game being played. And someone said, what about an online shopping website? If you've constructed that and you've designed it and you've got all those things in there, then that is quite a technical thing to produce. So yes, that's an example. Other things are design documents. If you're designing a game, you have to go through the process, or you know, of how you might do that, and you'd lay that out, and you might have flow charts of how the game works, etc. That's a really useful thing. Storyboards of stuff. So again, you know, Mark's mentioned storyboards in the context of animation and art. From a technical point of view, if you're storyboarding what happens in a particular game or in an application or in a piece of code you've done, which maps out how the user experiences, that's really useful. And sometimes work in progress images. So although we've said always present your best work, and I know sometimes that's a bit of a challenge for people because they think, oh, I'm applying really early, my best work won't be finished. If it is work in progress, that can still be really good. And sort of sketches that have gone towards that, or some of the development work you might have done, or if you've done a little animation, maybe you've designed the character, or you've sketched out an animatic or a really simple storyboard, or you're doing a sketch of a user interface to a game, or whatever it might be. They can still be really valuable for us to try and help us kind of understand. If we think about the different courses, I think that's the other thing. And I know sometimes people apply to multiple courses. And so I'm reading that question as I'm going along. I'll come back to that one. Think about the course you're applying to. So if you're applying to a games design one, something about game mechanisms that shows you understand algorithms, how do you balance gameplay, all those kind of things are really important. If it's technical art, there's obviously less about that specifically. It's more about coding, scripting, sort of understanding the fundamentals of graphics and how they work, etc. So think about what it is that you're applying to, and think about what it is in your portfolio of stuff that you've done that fits that. So if it's the games design one, as I say, it might be a game you've made, it might be a level that you've mapped out, it might be a concept you're developing and the ideas that you have for that. That would be really valuable, because then we can see, oh yeah, this person's quite passionate about this. If it was for technical art, maybe some code you've written for a project, maybe you've done some image processing work where you've tried to take some images and do some clever stuff in something like GIMP or, you know, Photoshop or whatever, but you've gone quite deep into that and show that you've really understood how that image gets processed and what the different values mean and the different layers might mean in that. So that would be really useful. So someone's mentioned about should include environment art. It depends on the course, right? The game art course is heavily around environments, but if you haven't done a lot of that before, it might be you've got character sketches, or you might have vehicle designs, or whatever it might be. So it doesn't have to be. We're looking at your artistic ability and your technical ability in these two things. So it doesn't have to be absolutely specific to what you're doing, but think about what's the most relevant, what's going to give us an idea of how well you'll do on those kind of courses. So we've got a couple of examples of stuff. So here's some stuff around some 3D modeling that someone's done. But what they've done is they've shown really how they've layered that up, where the original sketch comes from, how they've arranged the polygons on those models, how they've kind of put that together. And they were looking to do the character and creation one. And then further to that, they looked at the skeleton within that. So how do the bones work within it? So understanding the kind of mechanics of that character and how that might work. So it gives you a real idea that not just that they got something that looks great on the outside, they understand something of what goes on inside that, if you like, and they've really gone into depth about how that thing moves. And you can see in there's even things about how that skeleton how it would walk and how it would move across. So those things are also important to animation. I'm sure Mark would agree. But what this person's done is look at kind of how that skeleton actually affects that and actually kind of comes through on that. If we're looking at something a bit higher level, so for masters, then this person's actually done a full games design. And what they've done is they've done a simulation of a tabletop game. So they've designed a tabletop game. They've come up with all the rules that base around it. And then they've actually simulated that in a piece of software. And we just put a link to see how you can actually go and have a look at that and a little video of how that works. So that really is a complete package. And the examples we're giving you here are pretty good examples, right? We're showing you things you should aspire to. So don't necessarily worry if you think, oh God, I haven't done all that. But it gives you an example of the sort of things that really give us an idea of how those things can fit together and how you can kind of develop stuff and present stuff that's going to give us a really good idea of what it is that you're capable of doing. So there's also a little QR code there for you to go and look at the video demonstration. I mean, if we've got that for an undergraduate one, great, but that's a master's one. I'm just going to touch on something about the scholarships at Escape, because there are a number of things to kind of help support you financially with the fees, etc. The reason I'm talking about them is because, you know, the relationship with those to the portfolio. So the most direct link is if you look at this one about the scholarships for UK home and international students, we got them in there. It's a UK home scholarship, which covers the first year of fees for an undergraduate program. And there's an international scholarship which covers 4,000p towards that, towards the fees for the international students. Now, selection is based on the portfolio that you have. So everybody who sends their work in, everybody's portfolio is reviewed by some of our tutor team. Those that are seen to be really high quality get what we call long listed. So they kind of get put to one side and tagged, and we say, oh, this is a really good, strong piece of work. Then what will happen is, obviously, we'll go through that long list when the cycle is complete. And this is really, to be considered for this, you have to apply before the UCAS equal consideration deadline, which is in January. I can't remember what the exact date is in January, but it'll be something that is clear from the UCAS process. So when that passes, then we look at all the ones that have been long listed, create a short list, and those short lists get selected for or get judged for whatever the particular scholarship might be. So it's really important there that you put forward some good work, and this comes back to our thing about making sure you're presenting yourself as best you kind of can be, because that's what happens. There's also, for postgraduate, for international students, there's one which is, I think, on the next slide. There you go. Thank you. That's awarded as a fee waiver of £3,000. For that, you have to submit your application before the stated deadline, so there'll be a deadline for that, and submit their portfolio. And again, eligible students are automatically considered for that. So this portfolio, whilst it's all about entry onto the course, also could get you a kind of financial benefit, depending on exactly how that goes. If we just take, we've got some examples of work that's awarded a scholarship. Here's a couple here. There's actually for a BSc one there. But you can see, you know, what we liked about this was, if you look at those images there on the left as you're looking at, you know, the real expression in those characters, you can kind of almost see what they're thinking or so on. And then also those sketches of movement and really quite complicated movement that people have captured there. So I think that gives you, and there's some designs of characters there as well. It gives you an idea of the kind of things that get through to those portfolios. And for some of these scholarships, also they get judged by external judges from industry. So it's not just our tutors making those decisions. There'll also be someone else who's selecting those. So depending which scholarship it is, that will go to a slightly different process. But it's basically about giving some really good, high quality work. So we talked a lot about these, but when do you apply? So you don't have to send your portfolio in when you submit your application to the course. So we will contact you and our admissions team. We'll look at the qualifications first to check that you are eligible for the course, because although we really base primarily our decision on the work that you show us, there are certain rules about minimum requirements that we expect. What we would say is, you know, if for some reason you're just outside those minimum requirements, get in touch with us and speak to us, because if you've got a really strong portfolio, we do believe in giving people a chance when sometimes we know, you know, the kind of examination process you go through doesn't necessarily map well to your skills. You might be an amazing artist, but struggle with that kind of process. So anyway, the admissions team will typically, you'll have 4 weeks to submit your portfolio. So we'll request it and we'll say, can you send us the portfolio in 4 weeks? If you're applying to the programming degree, there's the programming degrees we do at so the specific ones, programming for visual effects and games. Quite often, if you've got qualifications in programming, we don't ask for a portfolio, because that is obviously a very technical program. And whilst you'll be programming for a visual end game, so to speak, the final thing will all be about what pixels on the screen. We are not so bothered about that. So do get in touch. Having said that, if you don't have a qualification in computing or some kind of programming qualification, but you do that almost as a hobby, then get in touch with us, because we would look at a portfolio of work in programming to try and kind of assess your skills when perhaps you haven't got the formal qualification. I've just been asked, so are there exact subjects for entry requirements? No, we don't ask for any specific mix of subjects in general. That thing I've just said about the programming one is specific to programming. It's about if you're doing programming and you've got a computer science A-level or you've done computing, then but generally we don't ask for anything particular, because we're really interested in the portfolio of work. You can also include an optional supporting statement. Okay, it can be written up to 500 words. It can be a short video, which is quite nice if you're talking about your work, or it could be an audio recording. And that's to help us understand your portfolio. Sometimes when you just submit stuff cold, you might be really proud of that. You might want to tell us lots of stuff about, you know, how you created it, or what your inspiration was, or some of the challenges you did. And we love to hear that. So not a huge number of people do take this opportunity. I think it's a really good thing, because again, these days you can just record it on your phone. You can just record a little 2-minute video that just says, okay, when I was creating this piece of work, this is what I was trying to achieve, and maybe tell us some of your influences. It's a really valuable thing. So I'd really recommend that if you have the opportunity to do that, it would be great to do it, because it really gives us an insight into how you work as an artist or as a technician or whatever, and it's really a valuable thing to do. And as I say, doesn't really take that long to do now, so we're not asking for some Hollywood production, just something that's really going to give us a flavor of your work and how you created the stuff you've given us. So I think the next slide, yeah, there you go. Important things to remember: quality over quantity. Okay, show us your best stuff. We won't mind if you've got stuff that isn't quite as good as that, or some stuff that you did early on that perhaps you're not quite as proud of. You might think, oh, I've got to better show them everything I'm doing because I've only got 6 or 7 pieces I'm giving them. That's absolutely fine. If you've only got 5 things, if they're really good pieces, strong piece of work, that's great. Show us the stuff that's really good. If sometimes we find the portfolio doesn't really give us a full picture. We'll kind of tag that and say, look, we think there's some potential here. Have you got anything else? And the admissions team will get in touch with you and say, have you got any other work you might want to show us? Have you got any more, for example, drawing, or have you done the animation tests, or have you got any examples of some scripts or code that you've written? So, that will happen. So, send us stuff, your best stuff, but there's a chance, there's kind of that second chance. Ensure we can get to it. Okay. Don't do something that's kind of hidden behind a password or is difficult to do, or you might not believe it, some people type the link in wrong, so we can't actually click on it and we get to the wrong place. Make sure we get all that absolutely right. It will usually take us a couple of weeks to review stuff, just because we get a huge quantity of work. It takes a while to go through those things. Sometimes it takes a bit longer, sometimes it can be a bit quicker, but if you don't hear in kind of around 2 weeks, then you can always get in touch with our admissions team if you want and say, hey, what's going on? But it's certainly, I wouldn't worry at all up to 2 weeks, and sometimes it can take a bit longer than that. So just to give you an idea of the kind of time scale. Mark, I think you've got some tips as well from that our tutors have shared.
Okay, yeah, sure. So the tips, these are quotes from 2 tutors. The first one is, a creative portfolio doesn't have to tick every possible box, but ideally shows a variety of creative styles backed up by technical skills, and above all, demonstrates passion and personality. Yeah, I think this is the thing, is at the end of the day, we certainly don't want to discriminate against people because they don't have access to software, or because their computer isn't powerful enough so they can't run certain programs. At the end of, almost all of us can get hold of a pencil and some paper. So we want to see, what is your creative potential? If you can show us that you have ability to draw, to come up with ideas, then and you can demonstrate this, then this is very positive, and this is what we're looking for above all else. To take an idea and develop it. And the other quote is, a strong portfolio should showcase problem solving, technical proficiency, and a solid understanding of different workflows. Passion, curiosity, and a structured approach to challenges go a long way in making a portfolio stand out. I guess this is really also about not being afraid to try things. If you do have the ability to download Blender or try something out in Unreal, then this at least shows that the software is available, and this is assuming that your computer can handle it. You're willing to give it a go, to try something out, to look at a tutorial online to see if you can do it. I think this is important because we value a lot of the courses we do, even though you're help with the tutor, there's also a lot of self-study by yourself. So the ability to look at things online and try and use them to develop your knowledge in a specific area is very important, because it shows that you can problem solve, and that will stand you in good stead in the course. That's
okay. So we've got some FAQs here. I'm just picking up on some of the questions. It's interesting. We've had questions both ways on the UCAS thing, like, what's the minimum, which I think is in the chat there. Absolute minimum is 80 UCAS points, but we usually look for 120. Some people said, what if I've got more than that? Can I still apply? Please do. We have lots of people applying with more than that. We set a level that we think is kind of appropriate for people as a kind of a hurdle to get over. But if you don't think you're going to hit that, don't be afraid to apply, because we have many instances of people that have missed out on that kind of level, have a great portfolio of work, and have gone on to do really well on the course. As I say, I like to think we've been doing this for quite some time now, so we're pretty good at spotting the kind of sets of skills that are going to allow you to succeed. So please do apply. There was also someone, again, I think, which said about any particular qualifications we look for, which there isn't. There was someone about, that's right, the when I was talking about the video or the audio description, would you do it for each piece of work? I would think maybe pick one or two of your favorite pieces of work and just talk about them in one video, because if you submit 6 or 7 pieces of work and then you've got 6 or 7 videos that go with it, that's quite a lot for us to get through, and I think it's quite a lot for you to do. So I would perhaps, you just send one video or one audio or one piece of text that kind of just describes your portfolio as a whole. It might just concentrate on the most prominent piece and the piece you're proudest of, and then it might just touch on some of the other work that's in there. We've touched on this one here. This is a common question, as you might imagine, and Mark's talked about it as well. As I say, there are lots of free pieces of software you can use for doing these things that might be a somewhat limited feature set, although say Blender's are pretty amazing to get for nothing. And I would encourage people to have a go, because one of the things is, although it's not an absolute prerequisite, we look for artistic talent, potential, and skill rather than proficiency in a particular software package. You are going to be using lots of software packages when you come here, pretty much across whichever course you do. Even if you're a 2D animator, which Mark has emphasized the fact you need to draw well, TV Paint, Toon Boom are all packages you're going to be using. So it's kind of like, I don't want you to be afraid of that, and I don't want you to kind of think of that as a worry. It's interesting. It's like, I do always say for animators applying for animation course, have a go at animation, because it's one of the things that, I'm not an animator, I'm a bit of a techie. I think it's really hard doing good animation. And I think sometimes people look at things and think, oh yeah, I'll be able to do that. That'll be easy. I can draw. And when it comes to actually kind of capturing movement and stuff in drawing, I think it's hard. And to do some animation, you really only need a pad of paper and a pencil, right? You can kind of try some stuff out on that. So I always think, have a go at that. And that's the same with the digital software. You're going to be using digital software. If you can get access to some, then give it a go. I think that's really good for you to be able to do that. Having said that, and someone asked in the chat, is a traditional art portfolio enough? And as Mark has said, yeah, if it's a good portfolio of art, we can see that you understand color, form, composition, all those kind of things, then depending on which course you're going for, that could be highly relevant. Not very much use for a programmer, for example. If you can't code, but you can draw, then probably apply to one of the more artistic courses. If you apply for more than one course, do you need different portfolios? You don't need different portfolios, but it comes back to what we're saying earlier. Think about the courses you're applying to. We have had people apply for quite diverse courses. So they might apply for tech art and concept art. They're not quite the furthest apart, but tech art's very much about kind of coding and the technical things under the bonnet, if you like, of what's going on. And concept art is very much about that visual communication and kind of getting an idea across and so on. Now, some people have got portfolios that cross that, and that might be one portfolio. If you think, I want to divide my things into two, then if you're building a website or an ArtStation or a Google Drive, then create 2 folders and say, look, this is the stuff that I think applies to the tech art thing I want to apply to. Here's the stuff that applies to the concept art. So, but, put your best work in and think what your aptitude is in. So you don't need to do 2 portfolios, but think about how you might make you seem the best person to be on that. Can I apply if I've never studied art or design before? And again, the short answer is yes, you can. Obviously, if you've done an art qualification, or you've done art, maybe you do evening classes in art, that means you're going to have a better understanding of that world, and you're going to have some pieces of work you can apply. On the other hand, I have personally seen people that have got A-levels in kind of history, economics, and maths are amazing artists, and they just haven't taken those options, and they show us the portfolio of stuff that they developed, maybe because they've done some still life drawing, or maybe because they've got a real passion about this and they've created all this stuff out of their own interest, and we've been blown away by it, and those people have gone on to do really well. But obviously, if you are studying BTECs or A-levels in creative subjects, you're going to have some of that background and some of that work you can show us. So it's not a prerequisite, but it is. It's going to be useful for you if you have, clearly, because you're going to have the more opportunity to develop stuff. I'll pause then because I'm hogging it and give Mark a chance to say some stuff if he's got anything he wants around those.
No, I think, well, just to echo some of the things that Ian's saying, I think, it's interesting, the question about needing separate portfolios. I think there's some subjects there's a greater degree of overlap. So, for example, if you wanted to be a concept artist or a games artist, and you had some amazing sketches and drawings, maybe you've got some of, you know, it could be of people or places or things that you've popped out of your imagination, then you can see that there's an overlap there in terms of, you know, the skill set that you would need to use in both concept art and in games art. However, of course, if you're in a more technical discipline that involves coding and things like that, then a portfolio that's heavily kind of biased towards drawing and art and, you know, aesthetic things, for want of a better word, probably isn't going to serve you as well. You're going to need to tailor it into a slightly more techie area. And I mean, I guess I guess it's like everything. You're always trying to put your best foot forward. So if you do have work that it feels more relevant to the specific area that you want to study in, then obviously put that ahead of work that maybe feels a little bit more tangential, and if that makes any sense.
Just picking up on some of the questions here as well. So someone said, should we talk about ourselves in our portfolio? You can do, if it's interesting about what inspires you and what's made you want to do that. So, you know, you definitely can do that. What we're really interested in is you as a creative producer of stuff. So if it's like, you know, I'm really inspired by a particular artist and that's why I've developed these skills and the way I'm doing it, that's really useful to tell us. Someone's also said, do we take things like personal statements and EPQs, etc., into account? It's really about the portfolio. We do look at the personal statements because sometimes that can help us understand the portfolio. And this, I think, where it comes back to that thing where you say you can submit a 500-word, 2-minute video or audio to go alongside it, because sometimes that helps us understand. So sometimes that's captured in the personal statement. So we do look at those because that's always interesting. It also gives a bit of a background about the person. You know, whether they've done some work experience somewhere or what other things they've got. So think about that. Interesting question from Mike there. So about what's the key difference between a portfolio for academic industry and one for the industry? And I don't think there's really any difference in the sense of what we're both looking for. If you're applying for your first job as an artist or an animator, clearly they expect you to have some of those skills that are going to be directly relevant to the role you're doing. So you're not going to get a job as an animator without showing you can animate, clearly. What we're looking for is kind of the same things, but we're looking for the potential, the kind of seeds of that, if you like. So in terms of what we're actually looking for, there's not a lot of difference. But in terms of the kind of level of what we're looking for, we're not expecting you to walk in and immediately be able to do a job. When, you know, industry folk are going to be looking for someone, okay, they can fit in. I can see if it's a 3D model, I can see they can do 3D modeling. I can see they can drive Maya. That's the package we use. I can see they understand about lighting, surfacing, and rendering. They've got all that already. What we're looking for is the potential to be able to develop that. Let's face it, if you could produce a portfolio that a studio was looking for as a job, then why would you come and do the degree, right? I want you to come and study here if you're inspired, because I think there's lots of other things around that. But if that portfolio was kind of the finished item, you wouldn't need to come to us. And one of the things that you develop during your time with us, okay, at the end, you'll get a degree, whether it's a master's or whether it's an undergraduate degree, whatever it is, you'll get a piece of paper that can open certain doors. Certainly if you want to study abroad, work abroad, sometimes that's really useful. But the thing you will also develop with us is a portfolio of work that should be at the level to get you a job. You'll do lots of really practical work, lots of exercises, lots of projects, lots of stuff that you work on. And the portfolio when you leave will be the sort of thing that will get you that job. And, you know, that's we've got a talent development team and so on and so forth. So the difference between is what we're looking for is potential, something a bit more kind of raw, and some real kind of aptitude towards these kind of things. People from industry need a more finished article because they haven't got time to train you for 3 years or a year to do that. I hope that makes sense. To what extent is photography considered in the portfolio if it was my main qualification? Again, depends what course you're going for. I think what we'd look for in photography is a real understanding of lighting and composition and color. So what's really useful then is if there is something that helps us try and understand what you were trying to achieve in that, because it's interesting, and this might be a bit contentious, but when I was young, you know, when you're using the old traditional type photography where you took it on film and you processed it, there you had to be much more selective and careful about how you created it. Now we all take thousands and thousands of images every year on our phones, and it's relatively easy. Even I'm not a photographer, even I can take some great photos occasionally. So I think that thing that tells us that you've actually tried to create this photo, and this is why you've tried to do it, and this is why the lighting is as it is, and this is how you set it up, is more useful than just sending us some what might be quite nice photographs that you've captured, but there might be another 1,000 of those that you threw away. So if you're actually studying a photography qualification, whether it's a BTEC or whatever, obviously that's built into that understanding of lighting and composition. And in fact, when you come to us, you do a little bit of that, so you'll be kind of head on that. But that's what's important in that case. So we want to see how you've understood what you've taken and why an image is good and what's made you take that particular image, if that makes sense. If a piece of work contains other work, a group project, can that be included? Yes, it can. You've got to be absolutely clear about what you've done. Sometimes we get applications from people at the same school or college that have worked on the same project, and what we have to be really clear is what's your contribution to that. And again, that's what's really useful if there is perhaps a little bit of audio or video or some written stuff that goes alongside it. As you can imagine, you know, we might look at that portfolio and say, wow, you know, that visual effect or that post-processing or that particular bit is really great. And of course, it turns out you actually did something else. So that would be, you know, not dishonest of you, but it would not be a true picture of what you can do. Equally, the other way around, we might look at something and say, well, okay, it's a group project, but which part of that did they really do? So you've got to be absolutely clear. And that's why sometimes it's really useful if you can show some of the working that's gone towards that. So maybe there was a team project that you did some kind of bit of 3D animation where you all did something, but one of you's done the particular piece of animation you want to draw our attention to. So if you can show some storyboards or maybe some trials you did from that, or maybe some kind of screen grabs of stuff you did, that's really useful to help understand what's your contribution to that.
Yeah, when you look at people who are showing their show reels, often say animators, for example, and they've done some animation on a sequence. They'll show the whole sequence, but they'll gray out or put in gray or black and white with a little tag at the bottom saying done by somebody else or not done by me. So you can look at the whole sequence and say, oh, they've done this, or they didn't do that shot there, they did this shot. So yeah, as Ian says, just be very, very clear about what contribution you made.
Mike's asked an interesting question. They're looking at the 21-week short course, the character and creature creation course, and they've asked, what's the difference between that and the technical aspects between this and the MA character and creature creation? Now that's interesting. From the technical point of view, very little actually. The difference between doing one of the we kind of call them postgrad short courses because usually people would be at that kind of level, but the short courses that run alongside the postgrad qualifications is that you don't formally have to submit the assessments for that, and you don't get a grade on it, and you're not expected to write the kind of reflective piece, which is the kind of academic side of it. So without getting too much into the technical side of things, those courses, they kind of do the same practical content, but if you're studying the masters, you're expected to be able to write about your piece and present and analyze and do that kind of academic reflection on it. Whereas if you're just on the short course, we expect you to be able to analyze your work because that's the way you get better, but there's no requirement to complete that kind of academic side of things. So that's why entry onto the master's program and the MA, you need evidence that you can do that. So you need an undergraduate degree, and that shows you can kind of write academically and think and do and analyze and do those things. If you just want to do the short course, we look at a portfolio of work to check that you've kind of got the kind of creative and the technical skills, but we're not so interested in your academic background because you're not going to be expected to write and reflect on the work in the same kind of depth. I hope that kind of makes sense. Okay. Ellie, Lucy, is there anything we've missed in the questions?
I think there might be one. Apologies if you have answered this.
Okay.
What 3D software would you suggest to explore before a master's program, except Blender?
Oh, okay. That's interesting. Yeah, we did. I didn't pick up on one. Thank you for picking that one out. It doesn't really matter. The software package we use, our fundamental 3D package, is Maya. And if you're a student, you can get versions of Maya to try out. As Marcus said, Blender is a really good entry level type thing. So if you're looking to come in onto that and you've never done anything before, Blender's kind of almost as good as anything. We don't assume you've ever used Maya before on any of our programs. It does mean, obviously, if you have used it before, then there's a bit less of a steep learning curve. So, you obviously know the interface. I think anyone who's used any bit of software, the first, few hours of your time are just trying to find, okay, how do I open a file? Where's that menu? How do I cut and paste? Where's that tool? Where does it live on the interface? So obviously, if you've done a bit of that, that's really helpful. But it could be any 3D package, really. If you've got some experience already or already got Blender, then great. Do some stuff in that. The principles are the same. There's a bit of a kind of transfer as you learn one package from another. A bit like when you get into if you drive a different car, right? Obviously, the main stuff is in the same place, but how do you switch the radio on, or where's those kind of buttons? Radio. God, how old am I? How do you stream your Spotify through your phone to it and get your Bluetooth connection? But those things could be in different places.
Yeah, they're essentially very similar.
Yeah. We've got some other stuff. If I were to invest in a device for a game art degree, what would be suggested? And when you say device, do you mean like a computing device? Because we are we're PC based, so we're not Mac based. Some people use Macs because a lot of the software goes across the two. But I would definitely recommend that kind of your workhorse of that kind of will run most of the software would be a PC, a laptop, or whatever. If you're talking about an undergraduate degree, I wouldn't necessarily rush out and buy one before you come. I'd talk to the people here. I'd look at the spec of machines we have and kind of do that. There is some advice on our website, I think, about kind of what the minimum spec for machines would be, and talk to the people here. So I wouldn't rush out and get one straight away. The early stuff you do is not going to push the machine that hard. So it's in your final year. You really want the best machine that you can get. So I sometimes say to people, leave it a little bit later, because we all know by the time you've got a machine 3 years old, it's starting to show its age sometimes. But it's definitely PC based, and you can have a look on our website. There should be some stuff around there. There was another question about what type of 2D animation sequences would you be looking for? Mark, I don't know. Can you?
I mean, basically keep it simple. I mean, I think, if you can show us some weight, doing bouncing ball, or a ball rolling off a ramp and falling to the ground, if you can get that working, you could try a very basic walk cycle. But really, it's more that, if we can see you've attempted the fundamentals and you've got some idea of weight shifts. I mean, if you want to try it, if you're able to on a software package, perhaps even Adobe Animate, which I think is, you can do animation on. But yeah, the exercise doesn't have to be groundbreaking. It just has to show that you've had an attempt, and you've got some notion of weight and gravity, and the laws of physics and how they react with an object.
someone's also said the portfolio is kind of full of 2D drawing illustration. Could I apply to a BSc program? You can. We'd need to think about what the kind of technical understanding you had as well. So have you got any, you need GCSE maths to a good level, but also, you know, I don't know what subjects you might be studying. Can you show us that you've got a bit of a technical understanding? Because just being a good artist won't be enough. You kind of need to, it's a bit like I say, you know, great artists and great designers can design an amazing car because it can look great, but someone has to know about some of the stuff under the bonnet. And being the BSCs, you need to know a bit about what's under the bonnet. So you've not got to be an amazing programmer or an amazing coder, but you've got to have some kind of understanding of that, some kind of appreciation of it. So it would be good if you've got a good art portfolio to see maybe, you know, some qualification that runs alongside that, or something you can show us that shows you've got a bit of a technical understanding. Someone's also asked about graphic tablets. We have Wacom tablets in all the studios, and some also have some Cintiqs as well, but they're Wacom tablets across the board. So you can get some quite reasonably priced ones. We've got some quite good ones, obviously, because they're more professional grade. They have to take the wear and tear. But you can get some quite reasonably priced Wacom tablets. I think it was the Bamboo series. I don't know if they still do those. So if you can get hold of one, then it's a great way to try out drawing on a package rather than on paper. Is it okay to use Procreate Dreams or Toon Boom Harmony for animation tests? I mean, we use Toon Boom Harmony. Obviously, it's a very different way of animating compared to TV Paint and traditional. So yeah, if you've done some stuff in that's great. That'd be great. Okay, I think probably our time's up officially, isn't it? I mean, if you have got any other questions, you can obviously get in touch with the admissions team. I think, Lucy and Ellie, we picked up most of them, haven't we, here?
Yeah, I think we've answered everything.
Okay, great. But please do get in touch if you've got any questions, especially if it's about a portfolio or what the requirements are. Drop us a line. We'll get back to you and try and help and guide you through this. And look forward to seeing your work soon, hopefully.